Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Tuesday, July 19th Administration and Operations Committee. Attendance has been taken, noting that all councillors and mayor are present. Anybody with anything to add to the agenda? Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to point out that our delegation, Cindy Toto, won't be here. Called me just prior to the meeting that she didn't have a link until just prior to her calling me, which is just prior to the meeting. So she does have a presentation. I think rather than present it, what I'll do is I'll forward it on to the clerk, and then she can pass it on to all members of council, and we can put it in for the council package for the
okay.
If that's okay.
Thank you for that. Councillor Gatward, you had something?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have one item under other business that I'd like to ask a question.
Okay. Anybody else? Councillor Bell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have one item for other business. It's in regard of the planting out on rest acres.
Okay. Councillor Coleman.
One item, Mr. Chair, and I can do it right now.
Please do.
Thank you. I just want to thank staff and those that organized the Camp Phoenix out at the Kanesville Fire Department Fire Hall Station in the last week. Thank you very much. Much appreciated by those that attended, from what I understand. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Anybody else? Okay, with the two items of other business and Councillor Miller going to be forwarding the delegations. Can I get a mover, please? Mayor Bailey, Councillor Coleman. Any questions on the agenda? All in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Okay. Declaration of pecuniary interest. If anybody has any, please do so now or at the appropriate time if something comes up. Delegations, as was noted, the delegation will not be attending this evening, and Councillor Miller will make sure that we all get that and have a read and bring it back to the council meeting. Adoption of the previous minutes. Somebody please. Councillor Howes, Councillor Ferrier, any questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Any business arising from the minutes? Seeing none, we will move on. Consent items. There is consent item to be approved, 7.1.1. If there is a recommendation, can I get somebody to put it on the floor, please? Councillor Bell, Councillor Ferrier. Any questions on that? Councillor Miller.
I probably could have asked this last month when the same kind of report came up on the Holt drain. But my question's around these improvements. Normally we see a petition, and I'm just wondering, when a petition comes forward, does that require all parties to that drain beyond that petition?
Mr. Walton, can you help us out?
Through the chair to Councillor Miller. A petition under the Drainage Act can be signed by any number of landowners. The landowners, to make it a valid petition, well, what happened there? I had it on. Okay, talk calmly now. A petition under Section 4 of the Drainage Act can be signed by any number of landowners within a watershed, and they have to have a majority in number of the owners in the area requiring drainage, which isn't necessarily the entire watershed, or 60% of the area if it's a petition.
Councilor Miller, follow up?
Yeah, follow up. And some of this is in the report, but I was trying to read through the lines a little bit, and I don't want to make any assumptions. A municipality can go ahead without the petition, ask for an upgrade to an existing drain. And that won't affect how the costs are allocated. Costs will still be allocated based on percentage of land being drained. Is that correct?
The allocation of the cost is entirely up to the engineer as they see fit under the requirements of the Drainage Act. So it depends on where the work is done, how many acres you have, and the like, because as you know from other reports, there's both benefit and outlet. So benefit is related to the work that's done that affects you. The outlet is related to your area of land, where you are in the watershed.
And just the last question. Okay, so we don't have a petition. The whole almost the same thing. There's no petition. For those landowners that are going to see an improvement, and I suspect most of them already know or want it, but for those possibly that don't know about these upgrades coming, is there a way they're being informed, or are there any that don't know? Do you know?
Through the chair to Councillor Miller, the process that they go through into the Drainage Act, there'd be notification of the people within the watershed. There'd be an on-site meeting, and not necessarily everybody's invited to the on-site meeting, but at some time during that, all the landowners will be notified when they sort of know what the scope of the project is, and they're laying out the cost to everybody. So there is a process there to follow.
Okay, thank you. And I just, yeah, it just makes sense to let them know if they're going to be affected or impacted by made aware. So I'm glad it's in the act. So thank you very much for those answers.
Any other questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. 7.1.2, Rest Acres Road Roundabout at Hutchings Drive. There is a recommendation. Can I get a mover? Councillor Coleman. Councillor Ferrier. Questions? Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to, probably to Rob, I think. Just looking at the prices that we've been quoted relative to the engineer's estimate, I guess that's an indication of the market we're faced with at the moment, and I presume that will play through into budget. But my question was, how does this stack up relative to the cost of the 4 roundabouts we put earlier on Rest Acres Road? Are we seeing it seems very expensive per roundabout relative to the 4 that we've already put in place?
Through the chair to Councillor Bell, clearly on a per roundabout basis, this one is more expensive. But it's an order of magnitude of the size of the project, right? Of the efficiencies of doing them one at a time, or doing a whole, like the whole other project that we did was $16 million, which actually included King Edward Street too. So in hindsight, but remember that tender was 4 years ago. A lot of things have changed since then, for sure. We're in the approval area of the MTO corridor here too, so we could only use MTO approved contractors on this one too. So you're into a different level of contractor. So you would expect that the unit prices would be higher because the competition is amongst, the similar contractors. And I think we've got a good contractor here, and we should see a good job.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? That is carried. 7.1.3 RPT 0249-22 for 114 King Street, Burford for a community improvement application. Can I get a mover? Councillor McAlpine. Seconder, Mayor Bailey. Questions? Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's not a question particularly about this application, but it's coming back to the delegation of authority to staff. This is a request to approve, I think, $575. It seems like that's the sort of thing where I would expect staff to be able to deal with, and would, if we need to make a motion to set a limit that staff can deal with these things, I'd be more than happy to do that. Perhaps Michael could answer on that.
Sure, Mr. Chair. I'm not, through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not an expert on this, but I believe these are technically Planning Act applications, or a quasi-Planning Act application, because the community improvement plan does fall under the Planning Act. So I do believe it requires a council resolution. So I think that's why we haven't asked to delegate them to staff.
Any other questions on this one? Councillor Miller.
Just through you, Mr. Chair, to Zach. Maybe, Zach, there's a limit on what an owner can apply for, but there's no limit on multiple owners of the same property coming forward, or is there a timeline or anything like that? Anything in the the rules, I guess, for community improvement plan.
Through the chair to you, Councillor Miller. Yeah, there is a limit per application, but we do have the ability to consider subsequent applications on a property over time. So we have had previous property owners come back and apply on multiple occasions for their property. So I think staff just uses their best judgment and likes to space these out.
Okay, thank you. I think you know where I'm coming from on this one, so appreciate the answer.
Any other questions on this one? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Moving on, 7.1.4, which is RPT 025022 for 5 Beverly Street East in St. George for a community improvement application. Can I get a mover? Councillor Wheat, Mayor Bailey. Questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? That is carried. 7.1.5, which is RPT 0246-22, year-end 2022 holiday office closures. There is a recommendation. Can I get a mover? Councillor Howes, seconder, Councillor Ferrier. Questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Okay, moving on to section 7.2, consent items to be received. There are 6 of them. Does anybody want any move or any pulled? Nobody wants any pulled. Looking for a mover for them all. Councillor Wheat, Councillor Coleman seconds all 6. Any questions on any of them? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Moving on to section 8, committee reports. 8.1, the Brand Heritage Committee report minutes of July the 7th. There's a recommendation. Can I get a mover? Councillor Howes, Councillor McAlpine. Questions on that report? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. On to section 9, staff reports. RPT-0220-22, the Bishopsgate Road and Elizabeth Ave proposed northbound left turn restriction. The recommendation, can I get a mover? Councillor Miller, Councillor Bell. Questions on that report? Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not directly related to putting that on Elizabeth Ave, but a question regarding Bishopsgate. Because a lot of the cars are trying to avoid the lights there. And we're seeing that intersection get busier. We'll see it get busier with the gravel pit on Bishopsgate opening up. More development in the employment lands, the east side of Bishopsgate. And I'm just wondering, do we have a timeline, through you, Mr. Chair, to staff, of when that intersection is going to be redone? Because there's a lot of complaints about the no left turns, no right turns, all that stuff. I'm just wondering if that's in the long-term plans.
Well,
Through the chair to Councillor Miller, I don't have that information off the top of my head. We're certainly finishing the transportation master plan up, which will come back in September, and I think that there'll be better indication of when some of these projects will be proposed under that. Clearly, as we're putting together the 5-year plan, we can probably answer. I just don't have the answer off the top of my head. I can say, though, I don't think it's planned for 2023.
I would guess as much. Okay, but I will follow up with you later.
any other questions on that one? Councillor Chambers.
Not a question, Mr. Chairman, but a comment. This particular, I'll call it a situation, the neighborhood, in my opinion, worked very well together. There was an email chain, and I wanted to mention that Greg Demers worked very, very hard and was very, very well received and appreciated by the residents. And I wanted to pass my thanks on to Greg for the work he done with the residents on this particular issue and others. So it should be recognized that he did some work with the residents, that he met with them and talked with them. And it was a good example of the residents working with the county to make an improvement for the neighborhood. And I think Greg should be thanked for what he did.
Perfect. Thanks for bringing that forward. Any other questions on this report? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? That is carried. 9.2 RPT-0232-22, the Grand River Street North and William Street proposed eastbound left turn lane. There is a recommendation. Can I get a mover? Councillor Bell. Councillor Ferrier. Questions? Councillor House. I don't believe it was, but you're welcome.
Through the chair to Councillor House, no.
Councillor Ferrier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to staff. Just in sort of parallel with Councillor Howe's question, we recently asked about the what we can do to enhance the ability of folks to use parking behind buildings on the north end of that same block. Has there been any movement on that? Like there might have been a report, but is there one coming about things we can do other than paint lines? Or is that what we got to?
In sense of signage or something, Councillor?
Yeah, just if we are losing those 4 spots, which I think is actually worth it for what is going to happen here. You know, what can we do to? We had talked about enhancing basically behind that block of buildings, ways that people could be aware of the parking there, specifically tourists. So maybe signage. I don't know, but has there been any movement on that? Because that I think would go hand in hand with, yes, we're losing the spots, but let's make people aware of some spots that are available. A lot of folks aren't aware of.
Mr. Walton, do you want to take a crack at that, or what's?
I don't have an update right now, but we certainly can give council an update in the future.
Thank you.
Councillor Bell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Rob. 2 questions, if I may. One of the complaints I see quite regularly, it's both verbally and on social media, is that the time that it takes to clear the Barnes Dance crossing is quite long, and people get frustrated. So I did a little bit of research, and there are other crossings in our town in Paris that have countdown timers, and it just so happens that the Barnes Dance crossing gives more time per meter that people have to cross than any of our other crossings. Now, I'm talking seconds, but if we can save a few seconds, that helps our driving community. My related question is the change that we're making now going to impact any of the time scheduling on that crossing, and will it just frustrate people more having to wait longer?
Walton.
Through the chair to Councillor Bell. So every intersection, the timings for all of the cycles are as per the intersection. They're custom designed for the intersection. In this case, the Barnes Dance has to, in this, we've got some pedestrian counts here. On a normal weekday, we have 1,150 pedestrians that use that crosswalk. So it's probably the busiest pedestrian intersection in Grand County. And one of the things that happens there is there's an exorbitant number of school children who use it, and there are crossing guards there. And when those crossing guards they go out to the middle of the Barnes Dance and they call the kids across, and then they've got to clear. If you recall, we had an independent consultant do a report on this, which you had got a copy of in April. And actually in that report, they suggested that as per some of the suggestions and some of the guidelines, that we should actually have a longer time on it. So I think that we're right in the spot that we should be there. And when you consider the peculiarities of it, and you got to remember that the diagonal there, we designed this for the diagonal, which has, I think it's 25 meters of crossing, which is longer than most other streets. So staff have looked at this. We think that it's good. when we do this other improvement, which we're talking now, which is really the last thing that I think that we can do without doing other major changes there, we should improve the efficiency of the intersection. And hopefully by taking away from the illegal maneuvers which are happening right now with the eastbound traffic there, make it safer too.
Thank you, appreciate that. It's good to have the answer to that question. Second question, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead. Yep.
There is a line in here which says, there are no physical changes that can be implemented at this location at this time to prevent illegal parking. We're talking about the northeast corner of the junction, which is right outside Burns Insurance. It's hatched away at the moment, but every day, at least once a day, many times a day probably, people park there. I've even seen Duralator couriers park not just in that space, but actually halfway across the zebra crossing, as I know it. So I suggested that we have a physical barrier there, but Rob, perhaps you can explain why it's not possible and what we would do to make sure that people don't park there. Ron?
Through the chair to Councillor Bell. The initial suggestion was made there, like, well, we talked, there's no physical things that can be done, like to do any sort of curbing or change of the sidewalk or anything like that, you know, is a fairly big project. You know, you've got the drainage considerations, making everything work there. So that's what we meant when we meant physical barriers. The thoughts that during the non-winter months that we could put up some of those flexible bollards or whatever, around the radius of the curve really doesn't work, because you'd find that they would, in a few days, they would all disappear when trucks went around and swiped them off. Community near where I live right now, they put some down the center median, and it's funny because some of the people who are asking for it are now on Facebook, outraged by what happened, and most of them are gone now because trucks have hit them. So we are thinking of some other things that might dissuade people from being in there, and we'll look into that and see whether there is something else that we can. Got a couple ideas we're batting around in the office.
Councilor Ferrier.
If nobody else has a question, I just want to mention, it's more of a comment, but I think we don't talk about this intersection as much as we once did. I think we got fairly beat up in the comments, kind of like Rob was saying about what happens in he lives in. But over the last 7 months, I would say there's nothing I get stopped more about in a positive way than the changes on Grand River Street North, the humps, the traffic calming, and the Barnes Dance. I see online groups from Hamilton, Oakville, and other huge cities come down and take video of, I can't believe they have this, we want this. I get residents, Steve and I will go for a walk in the area, and we get residents who literally come out of their downtown apartments to stop us to talk about what an improvement was and how they hated it at first, but now they get it, and businesses as well. So, you know, we got, people want change, but they sometimes don't really like it when it happens. But I think this is the last real piece of the puzzle for this intersection. The one thing that's still left over is people still cross because somebody's waiting to turn left and 10 people are behind them, or 3 people. Anyway, I think this is a good story. I just, you know, I know there are still going to be some folks who complain, but I actually hear, there's nothing on this term of council I've heard more complaints about than I now hear more praise about, than that intersection and the streets on both sides. So just wanted to mention that because I think it's worth sharing, and it's a good.
Thank you for that. Mayor Bailey.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to bring forward the information that we heard at police services today, that the corner that had multiple accidents every month. And since we put the Barnes Dance in, there hasn't been one accident. So at the end of the day, it doesn't matter about seconds, it doesn't matter about anything else. Working, and there's been no accidents. So good for us.
Yeah, and if I could just to add to what Mayor Bailey said there, as Mr. Demir said in the meeting, he spoke of pedestrian and vehicle interactions. And as soon as the Barnes Dance went in, it dropped to 0. It doesn't get any better than that. So that's a good news story, like I say. Any other questions, comments? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. 9.3 RPT-253-22, the insurance renewal. There's a recommendation there. Can I get a mover? Councillor Coleman, Mayor Bailey. Questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? That is carried. 9.4, RPT 0263 22, the approval of alterations under the Ontario Heritage Act for Adelaide Hunter Hoodless Homestead and the Stone Rail Bridge over the Glen Morris East. Recommendation there, can I get a mover? Councillor McAlpine. Second, Councillor Wheat. Questions on that report? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? That is carried. 9.5, RPT 0199 22, the Comprehensive Trails Master Plan for Barker's Bush. I'm going to ask for a mover and a seconder to get it on the floor. Councillor Coleman, Councillor Bell, and then I think Cindy's going to speak to it here, and then if there's questions, we will look after questions after that, but we're going to have a little discussion about it first. So, Cindy, whenever you're ready. Thank you, Kathy. Yeah.
Good evening to the chair and members of committee. The comprehensive Barker's Bush Trail Master Plan is presented to committee today as the final draft for consideration of approval for council's adoption. The need for this plan evolved after the County of Brant acquired 100 acres of these lands in 2019, which were previously privately owned, to ensure their preservation and protection for today and for future generations. County hired WSP Consulting in 2021 to lead this project, which has included significant consultation with the public and stakeholders, as well as ecological research and study to inform the plan. The plan, as presented, proposes recommendations to strike a balance between providing ongoing public access to this natural jewel in our community and the need to conserve and protect the resource itself. The key themes that emerged from the consultation process were harmonious with the ecological findings of the area and are relied on in building the plan strategies. The 4 key themes from consultation include protection and preservation of the natural environment, restrict unauthorized motorized vehicle use, keep Barker's Bush natural and relatively untouched, and do not restrict or prohibit trail flows. The Ecological Land Resource Plan confirmed the area's high botanical value, inclusion of provincially rare vegetation, wildlife species at risk, and areas of erosion that all inform the proposed trail map. The updated trail network includes closure of some existing trails for ecological and safety purposes, rerouting around the new residential development, and realignment away from areas of erosion. Keeping the existing and proposed trails as natural as possible from a trail surfacing and signage perspective are incorporated into the plan with safety and accessibility in mind. While the plan recommends management strategies to work toward eventual mitigation of unauthorized motorized vehicle use, the trail network will continue to be multi-use and potential conflicts managed by establishing codes of conduct and trail etiquette advertised through signs, trail guides, and other messaging strategies. The plan's implementation is recommended by phasing over a 20-year period and prioritized with safety and development timelines in mind. Should council adopt the plan, the recommendations outlined will be brought forward through budget requests and reports to council as required. There are opportunities for ongoing partnership and coordination with our community and various interest groups in the implementation of the plan, as well as various funding opportunities that staff will explore. In summary, the Barker's Bush Master Plan provides a long-term strategy for the protection, management, and use of trails within Barker's Bush and will serve as a guide for protecting the natural features and managing existing and future use. Joined with me tonight is Kathy Ballantyne, who was the staff project lead and is also here this evening to assist in answering any questions that committee may have.
Okay, thank you for that. So just before we get going here, I imagine there's probably going to be a few questions on this. So what I'm going to ask here, we're going to ask one question each until everybody's asked one question, and then we'll go back to others for multiple questions if there is. Okay, everybody good on that? So, Councillor House.
about avoiding natural, minimizing signage. That was a loud message from the community, and it was clearly heard and brought into this. Thank you for that. There are a couple of references within the plan to some areas that may warrant or need paving. And I'm just wondering if staff could speak kind of anecdotally about that. I mean, this was a 257-page report, and I think a lot of people will not have read it, but they might tune into it to learn some of the details. And just tell us a little bit about where do we need paving, why do we need paving, to respond to some of those concerns.
Thank you. I'm going to refer that question to Kathy.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor House. There are a few main connection points that we will have some asphalt surfacing. The main areas are the existing Dundas Street that connects over to Churchill Street. That path is being slightly relocated because of the new street being built there. So that will remain and be a new site to join those areas. It's on the periphery of the plan. There is a connection from Churchill Street to a new street that's being created that's just a pathway, a short pathway. There's a section behind the pool that we use for maintenance that's actually going to be where the new trunk sewer lays underneath. We've asked for just the first section to be paved where we have heavy equipment moving in to unload propane and things like that for the pool. And then there's one other section that really isn't clearly marked on your map that I will bring your attention to that's been just discussed with the last engineering changes. Around the swim pond, there is a path on the north end of the trail network. We are going to have a small section between that really is a maintenance corridor again, get to the storm pond and just to the the east side of the pond, we will have it joined to the Stone Dust Trail at that point. So just, again, very limited in that area.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Cindy, I think. First of all, I think this is a great report, and I would encourage people to actually read it because there's so much you learn about Barker's Bush in there. Actually, in the very first, I think it's in the first page, one thing that people might want to learn is that it's only been county property for 2 years. And that prior to that, if they were walking around in Barker's Bush, they were probably trespassing. But having moved it to county ownership, there is a price that goes with that. We have responsibility now to look after it. And so I think this report helps enormously in setting out what we should do. And there's a particular piece that makes me worry a little bit about the liabilities that we might have as a county. We've tried to make this a facility that will accommodate both cyclists and pedestrians. And if you look at page 46 of the report, and you can look at it later, I'm sure, but it's very clear that the pathway is very, very tiny. It's probably a metre wide. And if you want to do anything to it, then you actually get into the challenge that Steve Howes has mentioned, that you're into gentrification of that. You'd have to do something quite serious to it. So my request, and it's probably the only thing I don't agree with in this report, is that we should make this pedestrian only. And Cindy, you and I have talked about this before, but it may not be appropriate to make it pedestrian only now, but if we move forward with the proposals for the lands north of the NIF, make that a cycling facility, then I'd like to think that the Barker's Bush in time will become purely pedestrian. Do you have any comments, any thoughts on that?
Through the chair. So yeah, absolutely, through the consultation process of this plan, we did look at potential conflicts in use. And having pedestrians and cyclists could be a safety concern. Looking at the use of the area, we're not aware of any accidents that have occurred in the last 50 years of that nature. However, it is still a risk. There are ways that we can address the risk just through codes of conduct that were identified, identifying proper etiquette for different users for the system. But we do plan on doing a similar type master plan process for the north of the NIF lands and look at having a cycling route in that area that would be sort of single use for cyclists and may transition those cyclists from the Barker's Bush over to that area. So we would look at that as part of that study. I think those lands have other potential uses as well, not just for cyclists, but there's enough area there to accommodate both, I believe.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilor Ferrier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mine's more of a comment, so Cindy and Kathy are off the hot seat. I was got a letter, a correspondence from somebody who was saying, I wish the county would just have left Barker's Bush alone. And, I understand that sentiment. Nobody wants to see the housing that's going to go up, except for, provincial governments and developers and people who will live there. So maybe nobody's a misnomer. But, I just had to say to the person that when you look at this, if the county had left Barker's Bush alone, then the chances are all of this would have been developed, right? And we have to talk about the politics possible. And 25, 30 years ago, when it was zoned the way it was zoned, people, this is what was possible. And the fact that the county, between last term and this term, have solidified ownership of so much of this to remain naturalized with slight enhancements due to responsibility and the need to take care of it. To my mind, if the county had just kept their hands off of Barker's Bush, I think the worst possible outcomes would have happened. And I think that this report shows responsibility and stewardship. But the creation of this and the safeguarding of this space, the parts that we're able to safeguard, I think a lot of folks still don't understand that whole process and how it works. And I just wanted to say at this meeting that, that this is a much better story than the story that could have been had it been developed completely. And I think it's going to be wonderful. To be honest, I think that the trails are going to be just wonderful, and that people were heard, and that when the consultants first came to us, it sounded like they wanted to put in paved areas and internet hotspots and all this stuff, and this council pushed against that, and the community pushed against it. But even before the community did, this council was pushing against that. So what you see in the report, I think, is actually a really good balance of what the community really wants to see. So well done.
Thank you. Councilor Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kudos to Kathy. Fantastic report too. So basically, we're going to say cyclists allowed, ATV, and I read this throughout the report, and ATV and other motorized vehicles not allowed. Where does the e-bike fall into that? Is that a cycle? Is that a bicycle? Or is that a motorized vehicle? Or do we know at this point?
Question.
To you, Mr. Chair. The e-bike situation really has not evolved in the county at this point as a statement. There are some communities that have taken a stance with that, but we have not made a formal stance at this point. So at this point, it's not seen as something that we would entertain in this area. We would see e-bikes on more multi-use trails where they're paved and wider and things like that. So I don't think it would be applicable for this space.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other first-time questions? Okay. Councilor House, back to you.
So my second question part is related to finding the boundary. It's always been my understanding that the area of Barker's Bush very tough to delineate what's county land and what's GRCA land, and I'm not sure anyone alive knows where actually the mapping is. Even if you could put a fence there, where you would put the fence. So my question is about that, and it's about I asked this during one of the public consultations. I have a concern about what I call the over the hedge issue, which the reference to it is animated, where the woods abruptly stops and the development abruptly starts, and where you can literally be walking through a trail and see some guy in his hot tub in his backyard. And so I'm just wondering if we have an opportunity with the trail planning for Barker's Wood, if we have an opportunity for creating kind of a easy transition with plenty of space between those two areas. So that's my question. My last comment is, reading deep into this report, if there's going to be a snake hibernacula anywhere in Barker's Bush, I want to see a map for that to stay well clear. Thank you.
Kathy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The development is defined and will be defined with 1.5 meter chain link fencing in a lot of areas where applicable. There are several grades that probably don't require that, but we do want to prevent encroachment issues, dumping issues, and things like that in the, moving forward. The development does have a setback that's set by the GRCA. So there is a bit of a buffer between the edge of the properties and when the trail connections will begin. There are some sections, particularly on the west side, that are quite close to the development, however, so there will be, within meters really of those areas. But for the most part, the grades, there's swales and things at the bottom that will prevent people from getting really close to those areas. Good enough answers for you, Councillor?
That helps on that part. What about the
Separations, yes. We are still in discussions with the GRCA about potentially, utilizing some of those lands as part of the trail network. We're not certain where that will go right now, but there are methods that we can use to kind of, guide people in the right direction if you want to keep them on the beaten path per se. And I think we can use some of those strategies to kind of have a little bit of separation in those areas with thorny bushes and logs and different things that will prevent people from kind of heading in that direction. Apologize for that. Anyway, that's, I think, the best strategy. And, you are correct. It is difficult to tell where that line is, and we will try to endeavor to keep, people on our portion until we do get an agreement, or if and when we get an agreement with the RCA.
Thank you.
Councillor Gatward, to you for the first question, and then Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's just a comment in response to our last question about the trails being close to the homes, the new homes. And through my experience in Mount Pleasant, when we built the Trans-Canada Trail through Mount Pleasant, which comes from Brantford out to Norfolk, I'm told that thousands of people use that each year. And the people in Mount Pleasant are not complaining about the trail and people trespassing. Some of the homeowners did plant some evergreens, cedars, and so on if they wanted privacy, but that trail is very close to the beautiful new homes in the Barnes Farm subdivision. So I just wanted to make that comment so that everyone knows they can coexist.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Bell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Cindy again, and maybe Kathy. Following up on what Steve said about the closeness of the homes to Barker's Bush, I'm just looking at the map on whatever page it is. It's page 144 of our package, but my guess is there are 200 homes that will back onto the trail or the Barker's Bush. Kathy, you mentioned that we're going to have chain link fencing in some areas. Are we actually being specific about what are we going to mandate? What kind of fencing will separate Barker's Bush from that estate? Or are we going to get a complete mishmash of 200 different forms of fencing or not fencing?
Through you, Mr. Chair, as part of the subdivision agreement, that will be stated specifically and outlined within the maps that the engineering team is working with.
Just a brief follow,
yep.
If I may. Kathy, you and I know that some developers are not very good at putting fences up. And this is a huge fencing project. I mean, I'm going to guess that there's probably 3 kilometers of fencing we've got to go here. Not cheap, $75 a foot. So how do we actually make sure that the developer does this? Because he's not, other developers are not doing it when it's causing all kinds of concerns between residents and us as community representatives.
Yes, thank you for that question. The subdivision agreement will clearly outline the phases and what's required to be done in each phase and completion of this interim certificate. We're going to be very adamant in how we lay that out and make sure that those dates are feasible based on the phasing plans that are presented throughout this project.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Seeing none, just one comment I will make. In my years on council, this, I would have to say, is the only 250-page report that was actually kept my interest through the whole thing. And it, so kudos to this, because there's like unbelievable information in here, and I agree. I think if it's a long read, but I think if people took the time to read it, there's so much information. And I've lived here most of my life, and I didn't even know some of that. So it's fantastic information. So thank you very much for that. And with that, we have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation, so I will call the vote. All in favor? Opposed? That was unanimous. Okay, moving on to 9.6, RPT-0227-22, the budget direction for 2023. There is a recommendation. Can I get a mover? Mayor Bailey. Second, Councillor Ferrier. Any questions? Councillor Miller.
I have a question, but I'm not looking for an answer this evening. But I'm just wondering, because it was talked about in the insurance report about how other municipalities, what they're facing in terms of cost increase, and I am curious to know how other municipalities are dealing with, these huge increase in capital costs. But I'll leave it at that, and maybe that's something we'll talk about. Unless
a cliffhanger question by Councillor Miller. Okay. Does staff have a quick answer to that at this point, or is that something better to? Michael?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think most of us are monitoring the situation. None of us are exactly sure where it's going to go. So I think that's why, consistent with the Treasurer's direction, we're suggesting we not set any targets until we see where the current economic situation is going to unfold to.
Okay. Any other questions on that report? Councillor Gatward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The B under the recommendation includes decision packages for any proposed increase or change in level of service. Does that include any new staff hiring?
Stand by, Councillor Gatward.
Through you, the chair. Yes, that would include additional staff requests.
You got that, Councillor Gatward? Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Moving on to 9.7, RPT-0254-22, John Noble Home request for additional funding for Belcourt redevelopment. There is a recommendation. Can I get a mover? Councillor Wheat. Second. Councillor Coleman. Questions? Councillor Miller.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. It's not clear to me. Is that 4.4 million? I did read the report. Is that just the county's portion, or is that between the two of us? Us in the city of Brantford? I think it's both. Not me and Councillor Coleman.
Heather?
Through the chair, that is just the county's share.
Councillor Miller? Got your breath on that one?
I can't say it in a public forum.
Yeah. Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I'm going to guess it's to Heather. The $4.48 million that Councillor Miller was just referring to, which is the county share, I read that we can accommodate this within our overall current debt plan. Do you have an analysis which shows what competing draws might be on that source of funding?
To you, Mr. Chair, it will bring our debt limit to about around 9%. We have a self-imposed limit at 15%. I don't have a full analysis of what else is competing coming in. We can do that, bring it in maybe as part of the budget or.
So if I may, Mr. Chair, so we won't be displacing, to your knowledge, we're not displacing anything if we put this into the plan?
No, it will make things tight, but no.
Tight isn't bad. But, second question, if I may, on page 3 of your report, the table at the top shows a debenture servicing estimate of 321,000. But on page 367 of the whole document, the same number is 292, and I was confused.
Sorry, where was the 292?
I'm going to try and find it for you now. It was in the document from John Noble. It's on page 387, sorry, not 367, 387. At the very top of that page, the estimated annual payments to fund debenture says 292. Okay.
That, through you, Mr. Chair, I think it's just a difference in interest rates. I took the most current I had when I wrote the report, which is
okay. That makes great, makes sense. Not good sense, but it's sense. Thank you.
Any other questions on that report? Councillor Gatward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Heather. You're recommending debentures, Heather. Could we debenture this project internally with funds from our reserves and pay ourselves back with interest rather than pay increased interest rates that are currently rising? Would we, for instance, borrow from Infrastructure Ontario, and what is the current rate from them?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we haven't borrowed internally before. It is something that we can look at doing, it still impacts our borrowing limit. So whether we do it internally or through Infrastructure Ontario, the rate that I used was of July 7th, and it was 4.56 was the borrowing rate for.
Okay, thank you, Heather. Yeah, and it seems like a lot of money, but when you compare it to the $5 million roundabout and think about what we're getting for this $4 million, we're getting a building that's going to be home for 40 people, 40 additional people in our John Noble home. And the boomers are aging very quickly. So we're definitely going to need it. And that's my only comment, but I don't know if staff want to look at funding internally. I don't know what interest rate we'd want to charge to, maybe we could make more money than what we're getting. I don't know on our investments, but the reason I thought of that is a comment was made by one of our city members on the John Noble Home Board that they may do that. And I thought, well, I've never really thought about doing it that way. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it is a lot of money, but it's putting our dollars where they really, really needed. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? Councillor Bell, and then Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Really following on from what Councillor Gatwood just mentioned, we have quite a lot of money in our the proceeds from the sale of Brant County Power. I don't know whether this could fit in as part of the investment strategy. A 25-year return at 4.56% sounds pretty good to me, rather than taking it from infrastructure area.
Councillor Miller?
A comment, Councillor Gatwood mentioned the roundabout at 5 million. It should be pointed out the bulk of that is coming from development charges, not of taxpayer levy. I did want to ask through you, Mr. Chair, Heather, 4.56%, you said was July 7th. Now, you have to help me out with this. When did that 1% increase go in the Bank of Canada? Was that after July 7th? Also, so is that 4.56 out of date? Should it be at least 5.56?
It may be. They change daily. I can, Mr. Chair, I can double check it and see what it give you a current rate.
Mr. Chair, if I could we, if it's possible, could you get up-to-date numbers for next week's council meeting? Because that was the largest increase I think in 40 years. They said. I think it would have a bit of an impact on that.
Any other questions on this? Councillor Gatwood.
This isn't a question, but I just wanted to let committee know that some of the John Noble Home chair, vice chair, past chair, we're meeting with MPP Booma to request some capital funding towards this project. So you never know, things may change. Thank you.
Okay, no more questions? We've got a mover and a seconder. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. 9.8 RPT-0259-22, the recreation fees update. I get a mover. Mayor Bailey, Councillor Coleman. Questions? Councillor Coleman.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, and through you to staff. Question's been raised to me, and it's with Gainesville Hall. If an individual wanted the whole building, that would include the community room, patio, and the smaller meeting room, would the liquor permit be included for that whole, or is that possible or not?
Kathy's coming up to answer that.
Through you, Mr. Chair. We would have to apply for the whole building for the liquor license if that's what is desired. And if that was granted, then all the spaces could be utilized, which I expect probably would be the case.
Thank you.
Councillor Chambers.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. You would probably know this better than I would. I'm a little bit, I don't know how the league fees work. For example, we're suggesting that a hockey league, each team pays $3,400. Is that in addition to what they pay to rent the ice, or is that just a surcharge for a league? How does that work? Is that new? Is that something that we're just starting, or how should we start?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have run hockey leagues in the past, so this is the registration fee. There is no additional fees on top of those for each team. So they would split that between the number of members on the team. But we have done this in the past. There seems to be a great need right now for organizations such as this to be run by us. There's some groups that have faltered during the COVID situation, and we're trying to bring some of these groups back into our facilities this way.
So that is a league run by the county that teams sign up to be in the league, and that's what the fee is, the cost associated with developing the league, is, if I understand it correctly.
That's correct.
And then I'm just curious as to, obviously, why such a difference between hockey and dodgeball, for example, and basketball?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the hockey situation, we basically build the ice rates that we would normally charge groups into that, so that we're not losing any revenue. The school bookings are used for dodgeball and basketball, those types of programs, so the fees are quite reduced because of our joint use agreement.
So the guys on the hockey team league don't have to pull out their extra monies to pay for the ice time in addition to this, I guess is what you're saying. So that makes sense to me.
Any other questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Okay, so that brings us to communications, which I don't see any. Other business. Councillor Gatward, you had something for other business.
Thanks. Yes, I did, Mr. Chairman. Wanted to thank staff for the report that we got. I think it was 2 Fridays ago, the gravel to hardtop report. And on that report was listed Jenkins Road. And I'm wondering if I could get a update on the status of Jenkins. Is there going to be any work done on it this year?
Mr. Walton?
Through the chair to Councillor Gatward, yes, there is work planned to do the finalization of Jenkins this year. The work to do the extension of the work on actually Brant Mill probably won't happen this year, but the finalization work on Jenkins will.
When you say finalization, do you mean the rest of the gravel before they hardtop it?
They'll be, yes, they'll be putting a final coat of the hardtop on there.
Oh, so they've got all the gravel they intend to put on already. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Bell, you had something for other business?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think everybody on council is aware that the landscaping on Rest Acres Road, and particularly on the roundabouts, but more generally so, has led to a lot of concern and disappointment, both at the pace of activity and what appears to be the relatively poor quality. I understand that this is not costing the taxpayer anything because we have not yet adopted or taken over these facilities from the developer, and they must be brought up to the required standard before we will accept them. But there is a reputational hit, and I think we as county are taking it. So I would appreciate if Michael or Rob could give us some help in being able to rebut and to answer the concerns of the residents, and to put them at ease that this will be a very good product once it's completed.
Michael? Rob?
I can respond, Mr. Chair. I've responded to several emails about this in the last little while. So, I think first of all, we should appreciate the fact that this is a project that's not completed yet. So it was designed to be a 2.5-year project, and it'll be a half-year project. We're about, I think, 11 months into a 2.5-year project. So there's that piece that the project is not done yet. There's still work to be done. Another piece, I think, is that we are in a fairly serious drought. There's no irrigation on those sites. It was the landscapes were designed to be a low impact design landscape. So it's basically a drought tolerant plants in a drought in a non-irrigated environment. So I've heard some people say, "Oh, you should have put irrigation in that." Well, that would be totally contrary to what we espouse as a municipality in terms of asking our residents to not water their lawn, but then watering our own kind of landscape areas. So we water the hanging baskets and things like that in the downtowns, but we don't try to stay away from watering lawns or larger garden kind of installations. So again, this is supposed to be a low impact design, low water use garden setting. So a lot of the plants have gone dormant because they're designed as a drought tolerant species. So they've gone dormant, they look all brown. And the lawns just haven't come along, and they're going to have to be reseeded. We're not going to get those lawns back. Any new lawn, any attempt to establish turf this year hasn't gone very well. So those are just realistic. So Mr. Walden and I did chat a bit today. I think our contractor is frankly struggling on the site right now. A lot of contractors are these days. It's a tough labor environment right now. So we're probably going to mobilize some of our forces into the area this week to do a bit of cleanup, because I think there's some cleanup work that we can do to improve the areas a bit. And we're going to be working with the contractor to get some of that other work that hasn't been done yet done. So I was thinking this morning that we could do a press release on this. I think it is a good chance for us to expose what we have done on the site in terms of, trying to design on a low impact basis for a drought tolerant environment. It's a pretty harsh condition. Growing anything in the center of a roundabout is not going to be easy. It's a harsh condition, and you get conditions like this, it's going to get that much harsher. So I think that's a good chance for us to show residents that we're trying to do the right thing, but doing the right thing has its difficult periods, such as now you're in a big drought, you got a bunch of dormant plants that don't look very good. So we can get some press. So I think, in terms of what we can do in the short term, we'll either get our contractor out there or a few county resources out there in the next few days and do a bit of site cleanup. There are some unsightly weeds that have grown up, I think, in areas that were supposed to be maintained. They need to be cleaned up. That's fairly easy to do. We can get some press out to talk about what our objectives were in the landscape and what the landscape will likely turn into, as well as maybe a bit of appreciation on the timeline that the project is going to take. So those are some things we can do in the short term. I think it helps some of the residents understand what's going on.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you, Michael. That's exactly what I was hoping you would say.
Yep.
I think going out and letting people know what the design is, so don't be surprised that when it gets really dry, that these look like they're shriveled up. They will come back. That's the whole design basis. And I'm not sure the residents understand that. So the more we tell them, the better it will be. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, appreciate that. Okay, that's all I had for other business. So with that, motion to move into camera. Councillor Coleman, Councillor Laferriere. All in favor? Opposed? Okay. so that brings us back into open session, and there's nothing else on the agenda other than next meeting is Tuesday, September the 20th. And motion to adjourn by the chair. And just an FYI, when you walk out that door, you're gonna get wet because it's raining.